I'd like to thank each of the committee members and also trustees who are not on the committee for joining today to participate in the Governance and Long-Range Planning Committee meeting. For the sake of clarity for the public listening to the audio stream via WPSU, following the roll call, if all participants on the call would please mute your connections when you're not speaking, that would be most appreciated. For our discussions, I'm going to ask committee members to speak first on agenda topics and then ask for comments from trustees who are not members of the committee following if time permits. Tom, will you please call the committee roll?
Potts.
Present.
Hoffman. Hoffman.
Present.
Duran.
Here.
Hahn.
Present.
Hochel.
Here.
Mosser.
Present.
Kleppinger.
Here.
Schuyler.
Here.
Dambley. And Shipley.
Here and present.
McKinney. Wussner.
Here.
Arnell. Eckel.
Present.
And Schaefer. Very good.
All right. Thank you, Tom. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask for a motion to approve the minutes of our in-person meeting on September the 13th.
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. I'm going to set the stage here for the meeting a little bit before we call on our first presenters on the dashboard metrics. For the benefit of those trustees who are newer to the board, I thought I would start with pointing out the operating guidelines for the Governance and Long-Range Planning Committee. So, to give a little context to what we are going to be tackling as a committee this year. First, the place you find the operating guidelines, if you haven't been there already, is in the resource library on the board portal. You go to Penn State Board Resources, there's a folder there, and under that are all the committee operating guidelines, including for GLRP. As part of our long-range planning mission of this committee, we have responsibility for approving the strategic plan and monitoring its progress, and we're going to be, that is one of our agenda items today, to discuss and approve the plan for extending the strategic plan, as President Barron discussed with us last week. We have ongoing responsibility for monitoring progress, which we did at the last meeting with presentations, and we will continue to do that. The other part of our LRP mission is ensuring the growth and development and sustainability of Penn State, kind of a broad and important aspect of what we do. Today we're going to be talking in the first item about a dashboard tool that is going to assist us in that effort. Very good governance practice to have key performance indicators that we want to focus on as a board, and to be a tool, it's got to have board input as to whether it's the kind of data that we want to have and continue to monitor progress on. So if you recall, at the January retreat, we had a great discussion that led to a draft dashboard the administration put together and provided to us at our February meeting. What you have in the board portal, and hopefully have had time to review before this morning's discussion, is some context and some organization, as well as some updating around that. And so we're going to hear about that in just a minute. I would like us to be asking ourselves about whether these are the metrics we want to pursue as a board. If it's too dense, not enough, things that aren't in here that we would like to add, and so that will be the nature of that discussion. I'd also like to say that thematically, governance as part of the mission of this committee is also about board assessment and our retreat. And what we're going to talk about today is how we get to a place of better board performance through adding to those KPIs, how we want to improve ourselves, improve our performance as a board. So what we plan to do there, and Chris will talk about this, is talk today about an assessment tool that we will approve at a future meeting and time it so that we will have the opportunity to discuss it at length at our retreat. And what we hope to have are outcomes that we can work on together as a board. So great opportunity today to launch into a full year's worth of very robust work on both the long-range planning and governance aspects of our committee mission. And with that, I would like to call on Lance Kennedy Phillips and Karen Vance to talk about the dashboard metrics that have been developed and then open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much, Trustee Potts. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm Lance Kennedy Phillips, Vice Provost for Planning and Assessment. Our office is responsible for overseeing the university's institutional research process, the learning outcomes assessment process, the accreditation process for the university, and then also helping Provost Jones and the university with coordinating the strategic planning process. As part of our institutional team, development of dashboards is very important to us, and what you have in front of you, and one second before I do that, let me introduce Karen Vance.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Karen Vance. I'm the Associate Director for Institutional Research.
Karen has been leading the team that's been responsible for the development and maintenance of the dashboard you have in front of you. The 51 KPIs you have in front of you are items that were developed in consultation with the President's Council, the Academic Leadership Council, and the Board of Trustees. We have those 51 KPIs broken up into 8 broad areas, areas such as access and affordability, diversity within a diverse world, research and economic development, engagement, financial metrics, global engagement, and sustainability. So I think that's 7 broad areas, not 8. Sorry about that. Our goal today is to get your feedback on if these metrics and KPIs meet your needs. We have a team within our office and the Business Intelligence Group that will take this static document, which is just a list of these with some introductory metrics, and actually turn it into a more dynamic format. And when we talk about a dynamic format, what we mean is, when possible, these metrics will be able to drill down by campus, college, race, ethnicity, gender, and also, when possible, we'll have benchmark metrics with our Big Ten peers, AAU Publics, and other institutions that the board members see necessary for us to do comparison with. But for our initial discussion, we really just want to make sure that 51 here meet your needs. It is a very dense list, and I will say from my personal experience in developing dashboards, it's a lot of metrics right now. And so we can get a discussion of what's really important to you within these 51 that will help guide us in bringing back another iteration of this for you for your review.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lance. So we'll open it up for discussion on the metrics that we have and what's missing, what do we not need to see, because it is a very dense amount of information, but we would look to keep this updated and in front of the board at each board meeting going forward.
Juliana, it's Matt. I thought, these are incredibly interesting and very thorough with, 50 plus of them. And I wondered, perhaps a question for the management team, is destiny to identify the top 10 or so that you would consider to be benchmarked against other best practices, the true KPIs? Or are we going to continue with these in volume because that's the best practice? I mean, I'm sort of used to a private sector construct where you'd have the 5 to 10 key metrics that you run your business by. Is that where we're ultimately going to head with this?
That would be my recommendation, and with the idea knowing that you can have your 5 to 10 key metrics, but we have the opportunity to drill down deeper into any of these 51 that you would want, but having that as your top layer would be an ideal start.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you would hope you would see a true dashboard kind of reduced to one page. You could get what you want out of it at a glance, and knowing that it's backed up by a lot of other information and data.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
So I guess, Matt, to Matt's question, asking ourselves what are those top 10 that we would like to see?
Juliana, this is Nick. I just weigh in there a little bit, perhaps in response to Matt's question. I think from our perspective, when we put this set together, we didn't necessarily expect that the board would want to see all of those, but we wanted to produce a palette from which board could select key ones. I think for us internally, a larger number of metrics are important to us or different groups of us at the university. So this will be a useful tool for us broadly. But I think the notion would be if we can trim this down to the key set that the board thinks will be useful for their purpose, that's really where we'd like to go with this, I think.
Good. That's great. So committee members, would anybody like to offer a couple of data points here that we would for sure like to see on a shorter list of a dashboard?
This is Kleppinger. I thought that if we try to match up the metrics that we want to see with the strategic plan, that might be a way to narrow this down a little bit. So, strategic plan interest in the, certainly in the affordability metrics and the enrollment metrics, some subset of those that would be consistent with where the plan is headed would make sense to me.
Okay.
Good point.
This is Barb. Yeah, somebody's got their phone ringing, just FYI. This is Barb. I think.
If you're not speaking, please mute your phones. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anyway, I think that's a great idea. And the other thing, I'd love to get input from the Academic Affairs Committee in terms of what they think their priorities are in terms of what we should be monitoring, because this is really very squarely, in my view, in their territory. So, I mean, is this also being shown to Academic Affairs?
It certainly can be. This is our initial stab at this conversation, but I don't assume that this is going to be finalized today. I think we have some other input that we can get, and we can certainly get input from the Academic Affairs Committee.
Yeah, because they're the ones that are really focusing on measurement, monitoring, and all that sort of thing. And so I don't feel I have enough knowledge really to focus on what priorities are.
Yep. I agree.
Okay.
David, I know you are on. Is that something that the Academic Affairs Committee would like to take up at a future meeting?
Leanna, David was on, but he's showing he's disconnected now. I've emailed him to see if he's back on.
Okay.
But I don't see him on the line right now.
I would suggest that some of the financial metrics would be important for the board to have on this dashboard.
Okay.
Hey, Juliana, it's Matt. To your challenge of which ones we think are most important, I mean, maybe we could take that on as a homework assignment. I mean, the question's been answered that our goal is to get to a subset of these that are most important. And so maybe we can now stare at them knowing that we want to try to reduce them to 5 to 10 that we think would matter the most. I guess in part I'd turn back to the management team and say, which ones are most benchmarkable? Because I do think that's going to be important for the board to have contextually as time goes on. And that would help us, choose ones that we think are most important. Like, obviously, you'd want to benchmark against the Big Ten, I would think, because we're supposedly like-kind institutions on most dimensions. So which ones are most benchmarkable would be an interesting question to have answered as well.
Okay. Karen Vance actually did some research on it, and I can ask her to jump in.
So some of the ones that are benchmarkable are really the ones that deal with access and affordability and some of the diverse world ones. So if we look at graduation rate, if we look at the percentage of students who are receiving a Pell Grant, those are benchmarkable. Looking at yield rates, that's something that we can certainly benchmark with the AAU Publics, as well as the Big Ten. Some of the ones that deal with demographics can certainly benchmark some of those. So the initial ones that you see, almost all of 1 through 15 can be benchmarked, not all of them. Some of them just really aren't appropriate for benchmarking, or we don't have the data. But there are quite a few that we can benchmark.
And many of those are based on publicly available information and the official data that we report to the federal government. But if the board identifies other metrics that they'd like to identify for benchmarking, we have other mechanisms to reach out to colleagues and conduct benchmarking as well. But easily available benchmark will be that first 15. But then if there are others that you want to have benchmarked within the research or the finance area, we would have to just do some digging to see if we can do that.
Juliana, this is Abe.
Hi, Abe.
Just maybe a suggestion that the board would have 5 to 10, and academic affairs might have their own set of benchmarking tools, and even strategic communications may have some for the outreach committee, and finance and business capital planning would have maybe another set of that they would use in their committee.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, and we can run that by finance too for financial metrics. But I like Matt's idea, make this a homework assignment, because I'm just looking through, there's different things that, that I might add or emphasize. And, one of the things, I'd like to see is, the jobs, much more about jobs and what happens after that. So I think it's a good idea to make this a homework assignment and really come back and do a thorough review.
This is Matthew. One thing I might suggest, we have under global engagement a breakout between University Park and the Commonwealth campuses. And I think looking at some of the engagement numbers, like student-faculty ratio, it could be useful to have separate lines for the Commonwealth campuses versus U Park. Otherwise, the amalgamation of the two might look very confusing to the public.
Matthew, that's a good point.
Yeah.
When we get to the dynamic dashboard, you will have an opportunity to drill down in some of those areas by campus or college or and other demographics. But that's a really good point. That will be available soon.
Excellent.
Okay.
Juliana, Bill Shipley, just
Yes.
a little guidance on selecting the top 5 or 10. Some of these, a lot of them are fairly flatlined over the last 10 years, and some of them are moving more, and the ones that are moving more might be the ones we want to pay attention to. For example, in affordability, number 9, the graduation, the average loan debt is moving, and most of the other measures there, while interesting, they're not moving that much over the last 10 years.
That's another good way to look at it, Bill. So why don't we do this to move forward with our agenda today? Chris and I will get with the board office and come up with a way to, I guess, follow up on this conversation with soliciting input from other committees and the full board on this as we, as a governance committee, continue to massage this to get to the top line board dashboard that we would submit to the board for approval at a later time. This was not meant to be the one conversation we would have about this, but I think it's been very useful as we continue to look at how we use this tool in our work as a board. So thank you. Anybody else, any other trustees have any other comments before we move on?
Well, this is Barb. I have one more quick comment. First, this is a great thing, and very excited about this. And congrats to everybody who's helped in putting this together. The other thing I wanted to make a comment on the peer group is that yes, it's useful to see within our own Big Ten, but I also like comparing against the best of the best, and I think that's going to be very useful. And we should always aspire, to the highest standard out there. So I would love to see both comparisons where we can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Hearing nothing further, Nick and Chris, could we move on to the next item and talk about extending our strategic plan?
Okay. I don't know if I was supposed to take it or Nick, but I'll start. As being on the Strategic Plan Oversight Committee and looking at where we are through the strategic plan, it really seems that we have a lot of untapped parts of our strategic plan that are yet to be explored. As we've been kind of going through, we're in the third cycle of looking at funding some initiatives from the plan, and I really believe that taking this strategic plan and continuing it really makes sense because there is a lot of things yet we've not really been able to tap through the whole part of where we're trying to head with the strategic plan, and I think that it's a real good idea to continue this plan another 5 years out into the future and really get in deeper to trying to meet our goals from the strategic side. So I'll turn it over to Nick, and he can explain it probably a whole lot better. Nick?
Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to do my best. So I just, for perhaps the newer members of the board, I'll just share some of our philosophy about what we think effective strategic planning constitutes. First and foremost is the development of a mission-supporting vision. Second, conversations about and embracing the institution's core values. Third, articulation of core priorities that span all endeavors. These include topics like inclusion, access, affordability, sustainability. Fourth, identification of opportunities where the university is uniquely positioned to lead. Fifth, identification of support activities that require our attention to be better. This includes facilities, IT, HR, advancement, communication, etc. And then, perhaps most importantly, the two final things. First, alignment of institutional focus and operations with the plan. There's no point in having a strategic plan if it doesn't guide the way the university is doing business. And then second, and related to that, is very structured and deliberate implementation. That's where we are now. We are 2 years and 9 months into the implementation process, and as Chris indicated, I think we're making very good progress. Probably one of the areas where I would say we've had the most significant success is that we are seeing engagement across our entire community in all of the elements of the strategic plan. People are really leaning in and not just embracing, but owning the plan, and we're seeing a lot of activities that are now coming forward as people really believe I think, in what we are doing and our commitment to some of these areas. So here we are, 2 years and 9 months into implementation. As Chris indicated, through the request for proposal process, we funded 22 seed projects. We are meeting tomorrow to recommend the funding of 10 more. These cover a broad spectrum of areas. There is discussion of them in the material that was provided in advance of the meeting. In addition, some of the major signature initiatives now have evolved to the point that they're being supported, and these include things that board has been briefed on.
Nick?
Yes. Yep.
Nick?
Yes.
There's a lot of static on the line. Am I the only one that's got a problem?
Yeah. I'm not hearing it.
I'm not hearing it.
I hear a little bit. I can hear the static.
Again, if everybody who's not speaking could put their phone on mute, that might help.
Mine's on mute.
Okay, Juliana, can you still hear us?
No.
Now mine is clear, Keith Eckel.
Mine's clear, Bob.
Yeah, I'm clear.
This is Brandon. This is Brandon. I'm getting a lot of static.
Juliana, you might try disconnecting and then redialing in.
Okay.
I don't know if that will help at all.
I'll do that.
Okay.
I'm back.
Is that better?
Yes. Perfectly clear. Thank you.
Okay,
Nick. Sure, you can continue now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. So I was just beginning to mention some of the signature initiatives that we've been launching, some of which we've briefed the board on and engaged the board in discussion, most recently, One Penn State 2025. We also have the Consortium to Combat Substance Abuse, which we stood up about a month ago. That's Penn State's response to the opioid epidemic. We have the Energy University, number of other ones are just beginning to emerge, and we will see coming up for support in coming months. So we're making very good progress. In particular, I would say that one of the things that we're seeing now is some of the projects that we funded as seed projects in the first round of the RFP process have led already to attempts to get external funding to support the continuation of those projects and the development into really full-blown signature initiatives as they've really gained some traction. So good progress being made on all fronts. We are, as I said, 2 years and 9 months into implementation of a 5-year plan. This plan was to take us through to 2020. And so if we were to stick to our cycle, we would need to begin a new planning cycle basically in 3 months to allow for 1 year of unit level planning and then 1 year of institutional planning to have a new plan in place by 2021. We've had a number of discussions internally about where we are, what the options are, and the options are 3. One is we do exactly that. We start a whole new strategic planning cycle. We start with a clean sheet of paper and go through the entire process again. Option 2 is we do nothing and just extend the plan. Option 3 is that we use this as an opportunity to do a very disciplined and structured assessment of the progress that we have made with the plan so far. So that framework would involve a number of considerations. First, we would seek to really understand if we're putting our energies into the right things and that those things are worthy of continued investment. We want to authentically evaluate the plan progress to determine next steps. We want to identify future directions. There may be some areas that in this past cycle of planning we really missed and need to bring to the table. And then I think build a sort of a structure that will ensure that any evaluation and assessment we're doing at all levels is consistent and perhaps can be used for future evaluations. So that's really option 3. Our recommendation after much consideration is, given the progress we're making toward the plan goals, given the sort of long-term vision associated with some of the efforts, a good example is One Penn State 2025. It's not One Penn State 2020. It's One Penn State 2025 because we really think that we need through to 2025 to implement that vision because it is sufficiently bold. So our recommendation is that we embrace option 3, which is to do a formal structured assessment of our plan progress to date, use that information to both make adjustments to the current institutional plan where appropriate, and empower the units to likewise revise their plans. Since this strategic plan cycle was implemented, we have a whole group of new deans, and we really want them to weigh into the next 5 years of their unit's directions. And then basically, with that information, with those revisions to the plan, keep charging forward in the main direction that we are going now, which everybody seems to be embracing. So we wanted to bring this idea, this recommendation to the board as GLRP oversees strategic planning and strategic plan implementation. We wanted to ensure that you were supportive of this way forward, and I'm happy to take any questions about that. I will emphasize that our assessment process is not one where we sort of sit around in front of a cup of coffee and look at each other and give thumbs up. This will be a very structured, disciplined process with objective assessment of our progress or lack of progress in some areas that will lead to specific modifications to the current plan for the future 5 years.
Yeah, Nick, this is Barb. I just had a question. We've really hired some great deans, the ones that I've met, and you've really, I think at this point, hired the majority of deans. And I'd love to know the kinds of, just so maybe one or two examples where the new ideas and new energy of the deans are changing, whether it's on the margin or more, or a strategic direction. If that's something you can comment on, and how it could all add up in terms of moving us forward and perhaps in a slightly different way.
Yeah, so I would say there are some places where they're pushing new envelopes and have new ideas. So Justin Schwartz is the new dean of the College of Engineering. One of the things that you all approved at the board meeting last Friday in generic terms, but was approved by our Faculty Senate Council on Tuesday, was the dissolution of the Department of Mechanical and Nuclear Engineering into mechanical engineering department and a nuclear engineering department. This is aligned with the stewarding resources theme, in particular the focus on energy, and Justin really feels that this is the moment for that college to make this strategic change in structure in order to better position the college moving forward and to align with that strategic direction that has been articulated. More generally, Bob, I would say that I think many of the deans were attracted here because of what they saw in the strategic plan and their ability to align their units with it. And so I think many are excited about the opportunities that the plan represents.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly my sense. You know, Hari, Justin, I mean, they're so dynamic. And two quick questions. One on Justin and that dilapidated engineering building. How much is that hurting him in terms of faculty and student recruiting? And also, I read about a major gift in the nuclear engineering, but it didn't say the size of it, and wondered what that is.
I don't have the number, but it is a naming gift for the Department of Nuclear Engineering. I don't want to just guess the number. I don't have it in front of me right now. On the state of the engineering infrastructure, I can tell you that in the current university's capital plan that the board has approved, the single largest commitment of investment to engineering, and in particular to begin the growth of an engineering campus on the west side of Atherton Street, and this will produce state-of-the-art facilities for engineering so that we can serve our students better. Justin will be able to attract world-class faculty with these new facilities. So it represents a major commitment on the part of the institution.
Yeah, I know. What's the time frame for them to be operational? How far away?
Well, if we're starting immediately, and so this current capital plan is 5 years. Some of the buildings are sufficiently large that they will take several years to design and construct. So we should see the first buildings coming online towards the end of this capital plan, maybe 4 years from now. And this will continue most likely through the next capital plan that is yet to be discussed. But it is a major upgrade to all of our engineering facilities.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Nick, how long are you anticipating this formal assessment will take, and is following that formal assessment, will you be coming back to this committee for approval of something, or are you looking for that sort of approval of option 3 today?
Well, we would like to get the I think as soon as possible, get the concurrence of GLRP in particular to proceed in this direction. We think the assessment process, because it is going to be rigorous and inclusive, we need to reach out to all the units who participate in the strategic planning process and include them in this assessment and roll all of that information up. It's going to take us a year to do that if we are to do it well. So at the end of that process, then we will use that information to edit, revise, restructure, and reformat the strategic plan. That will then be submitted. That revised plan will be submitted for approval. I think at this point, while GLRP formally approves the strategic plan, we wanted to make sure that GLRP were on board with proceeding to develop a new strategic plan in this manner.
Okay. In that regard, then, other questions for Nick or other discussion on the general direction that we're heading?
Keith Eckel, with a comment, if that's okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
what I would observe is, Nick, I truly embrace your endorsement of that third option. I don't think it makes sense to expend more time on developing five-year plans, and you only get them implemented for a couple of years. So I think this is very practical. I was very concerned that with change coming so fast, it is critically important to reevaluate. So I think you've come to us with a very good solution, and it does underline one additional thing, and that is that this committee must expend as much time on long-range planning as it does on governance.
Yeah, Keith, thank you. I agree with that. As Keith knows, as chair, we had to spend a lot of time on, other governance issues, and it's just really the last year or two we've been able to focus. And as a reminder, it's not just monitoring, but participating in the process. So this is great, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Other members of the board, other trustees participating today, any questions or comments?
Juliana, if I may add one more thing that is related
Certainly.
to this. I think the other place, I obviously describe successes on implementation. I think the other place where we're seeing success and resonance with this plan is, I think as everybody knows, this is the strategic plan really forms the basis of the current campaign plan. And as you all know, because you get frequent updates from Rich and from Eric, we're going gangbusters on the current fundraising campaign. People are resonating with these ideas and themes. That's another argument, I think, for sort of continuing on the path, modified as necessary to address weaknesses and respond to opportunities. But the core direction that the strategic plan is laying out seems to be resonating with donors, and that's a momentum we'd like to keep going as well.
Terrific. Good point.
Hey, Juliana, it's Matt.
Sure.
And Nick, question. I know you said this, but I'd appreciate if you could repeat how One Penn State 2025 dovetails with this strategic plan as we sit past the midway point now. What's the elevator speech on how these two reflect one another?
Yeah, so we have 5 thematic priorities in the strategic plan. These are areas that we identified as a community where we felt Penn State was uniquely positioned with strategic investment of resources to really have an impact and provide leadership nationwide and even globally. One of those 5 areas is transforming education, and this was focused on us bringing forward bold initiatives to really rethink the way that an institution like Penn State delivers education to 100,000 students or more at a time in a manner that is focused very much more on the learner, so on the demand side rather than the supply side. It was in that context that the One Penn State 2020 initiative emerged, and it indeed is a bold vision for how Penn State will reinvent itself and provide education differently in 2025. So it's a good example of sort of almost perfect alignment with one of the strategic plan themes.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. And look, I think there's a risk that it's so bold and so big as to look like the strategic plan as we talk about it further. So I would just keep that in mind as we think about how we brand our way through the completion of the 5 pillars of the strategic plan, and how we talk about One Penn State going forward. I mean, it's kind of catchy. One Penn State 2025 if you just heard that at first blush, you'd think that is our strategic plan. So just maybe that's, and maybe that's worth noting as we go forward.
Sure. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Are you looking today? And I haven't heard Frank on the phone. Do we need to take a motion to approve the direction here, option 3, as laid out by Nick?
I think that would be appropriate, yes.
All right. I will ask for a motion approving the direction Nick has laid out for assessing and making adjustments to the strategic plan in the next year.
So
moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you, Nick.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Juliana, this is Chris.
Sure.
We just voted on option 3, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, that will be very clear in the minutes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Yes. Moving on to our board self-assessment, I have had the opportunity to review a new AGB document called An Anatomy of Good Board Governance in Higher Education that the board office provided, and would just commend it to you. I hope we can provide this to the committee as we go into our retreat this year as a pre-read. The whole board. It's a great reflection on what makes great governance in higher ed, and just to reduce it to sort of a very, very short summary. What is the right composition of a board, the right relationships, and what I'd like to talk about right now is the right focus. What is the right focus the board has on what it needs to be doing in helping us do that. And I'll just read one sentence here. The most reliable way for a board to ensure it is governing well is by measuring its performance against an objective standard, reflecting on its own practice, and making adjustments in response to new circumstances and new challenges. Well, two sentences. When done regularly and well, this process of reflection and self-assessment serves as a process of continuous improvement, and it is the way we hold ourselves accountable. I thought that really encapsulated past discussions and the good work of past members of this committee and chairs' leadership on the retreats that we've done, the surveys that we've done, but really digging in this time around to how we can really focus on improving our governance through a self-assessment. So I know there's a lot of interest in this, and Chris is going to be heading this process for us as a committee, and so I will turn it over to him to talk about how we move forward. This is just an initial discussion of what kind of a tool we might adopt for moving this forward, and hope to have a really in-depth discussion about it at the retreat in July. So, Chris?
All right, thank you, Juliana. So just kind of a background, Juliana and I did have a conversation previous to this on moving this self-assessment of the board forward. So our timeline that we've kind of put together for us is that we have a subcommittee that has been appointed by Juliana, which will be Trustee Barb Duran, Emeriti Trustee Keith Eckel, Mr. Shipley, and myself will be part of the developing of that assessment, getting it out to all the trustees to review, our committee to review as well, to make sure that we have touched on the right areas of assessment. and then during the February to May, getting all board members to take that assessment so that we have the data that we can then put together from May till July to make sure that we're able to kind of go over what our results and review were, what we came up with through the assessment. So there's a lot of different areas. I've looked at some that were done. The board typically used to do them every 3 years. We know that they were done in 2006, 2009, and I have one here that was ready to go out in 2012, but never went out due to the situation that was going on at the time. But as I look through, there's a lot of different criteria. The one in 2012 touched on through the mission of the institution, the governance and education policies, the planning part, board and president relations, physical plants, financial management, board membership, orientation and education, organization and performance, and then key relations and key constituencies. So those are the ones that they were looking at in 2012. I know that my subcommittee has been very, very much involved in other organizations in doing these types of assessments. So I'm looking forward to, as we put all this together and try to use the expertise that we have on the board to put together a good assessment that we can get out and hopefully come away with some really great, meaningful information that will move the board forward in its governance. I think that's pretty much where we're at right now. So I'm interested in questions.
Yep, thank you. Open it up for discussion.
Chris, this is Matthew. As I mentioned in my email a couple days ago, my survey, my background is in survey research and research methodology and public opinion. So if I can be of any assistance to the subcommittee in putting this together, I'm more than happy to participate.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. Other comments? Members of the board who are participating today, any comments, any questions for Chris? I think this will be a process, and look forward to seeing what we get.
Yeah, I think it'd be welcome to do and good to get on with it, and feedback will be useful as we consider future planning cycles. So,
yeah, I think part of from the background, reading and from my experience, having ample time to sit and reflect on the outcomes of the assessment will be key. And so we have that time at the retreat in July when, timing-wise, this will work well for us to really dig in to the results and come up with plans for how to implement whatever results, desires we have as a board for making changes as a result of the self-assessment.
Now, this is Lynn. I think, understanding what you're saying, that perhaps Penn State has a unique opportunity with the unique structuring of the board and governance of the board versus the majority of the rest of the country in that matter. So I would suggest we probably have a very good opportunity to go beyond what the norm is.
To go beyond
what the norm is.
Yes.
Against our peers.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can do better than Maryland. I think we can do better than Ohio State. I think we can do better than Michigan State.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've done a lot of work already. We're in a very, very good point, and I think it's why the timing of this self-assessment is so good.
So
Yeah,
my
Len, this
point
is David Hahn. So I agree completely with what you're saying, and I think that was part of what we were going through as we were collecting a lot of the other assessment tools from other boards, which is that we found some pieces that were helpful and some pieces that, quite frankly, weren't really particularly relevant. And so rather than trying to sort of superimpose what another institution or organization is doing on top of what we do, the process that's been ongoing has been to try to look to other assessment tools, both at like an AGB levels as an oversight, but also other individual boards and organizations, and extract the useful and meaningful pieces from that and create our own. And it's a huge task, but one that needs to be done.
So the aspiration that I have would be to be far above average.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. I love this quote. This is also from an AGB document specifically on assessing board performance. Planned and led effectively, the assessment process can enable a board to understand how a group of high-achieving individuals from various walks of life can come together and function as a team. Okay, if there's nothing further on this assessment, we'll quickly talk about the board retreat planning and where we are with that. As I mentioned a couple times already, we are looking to hold the board retreat in one business day ahead of our July board meeting in, I guess it will be Brandywine this July. We will have, as we have had in the past, an optional Wednesday evening social event for the board to get together and have dinner, and then begin on Thursday morning, 8 a.m., and conclude in time for dinner with our host campus on Thursday evening. While we have talked now about the board assessment and the time that we hope to have ample time set aside to discuss the results, we also, as a board in past retreats, have strongly encouraged ourselves to continue to hear from students and understand how some of what we are hearing can impact the direction that we take as a board. And I think I'd like to continue to do that as we can, working with the board office to have a conversation with our students and then have a deep dive into some of the issues that are raised by our students. I was taking good notes last week when our student panel, which I have very much enjoyed hearing from them the last few board meetings, financial issues are still a concern, but mental health was at the top of the list of things, and I think we continue to hear not only about it on our own campus, but across the country. And so I will be soliciting from all of you today and going forward, if we spend half a day on assessing the board results of the board self-assessment and talking about how we move forward from there, I'd like to spend the other half of the day thinking through a student panel and what that looks like. So my subcommittee as volunteered is Mike Hoschel and David Hahn. And I would entertain any other raised hands on this phone call for people who would like to help plan our time together. It's a little bit shorter than we have done in the past, but I think it's going to be ample for what we need to do and really focus on going forward. So those are some ideas, but a lot of the planning will happen in the spring. And open that up for discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Juliana. I think we all noticed the compelling portion of the retreat this past January with that student panel. So I'm excited to be able to kind of engage that similar discussion and tailor it to those major issues, or not major, but larger, the scale of the university issues that were discussed at the meeting on Friday.
Thank you.
And David and Michael, if you need some assistance, I'm happy to put my oar in the water with you.
Great.
Thank you. I'm assuming that was Dave Kleppinger.
Yes, it was. Sorry.
Duly noted.
David, this is Brandon Short, and I'm gonna be willing to help you out as well.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
And I guess to be clear, you guys, I am taking the lead on the retreat planning. David has a lot on his plate. He is on the committee, and you guys now are as well. So that's terrific. But we'll be meeting. But David didn't volunteer to chair this particular retreat planning subcommittee. So I appreciate the help.
I have my forward button on my email well established.
That's great. Okay. Any other thoughts at this point on the retreat before we begin to move through the rest of the agenda? All right. We see in our board portal we have our report that the board office provides on expenses to conduct our meetings. You can see September's meeting very much in line with past expenses there. Are there any questions about that material? All right. Under other business, we are, I think, having the flexibility to hold telephonic meetings, at least at this juncture, proved to be a great flexibility because we did want to have for this meeting both the discussion of the dashboard metrics as well as the discussion of the strategic plan, and both of those things needed to be timed after the board meeting last week. One, because we didn't have a draft concluded just yet, and the latter, the strategic plan, because President Barron did want to have the opportunity to mention that to our entire board before we had an action on it at our meeting today. So I think the flexibility of having telephonic meetings, at least for the times when we need to do that, has been very, very helpful so far. We do have a telephonic meeting in mind for February in lieu of an in-person meeting, but we'll have an in-person meeting in May. Together with the retreat, that will give us 3 in-person governance opportunities, 2 committee meetings and then the retreat, and then 2 telephonic meetings throughout the year. However, anytime we feel we need to meet off-cycle or at a different time, if we need to meet by I hope eventually we will get to the point of being able to have Skype or Zoom or some other face-to-face remote way of getting together as a committee. But when I mentioned that to Tom Pincala last week, you should have seen the look that he gave me. We weren't quite ready to do that for this meeting. But I do hope all of you on the committee as well as other trustees will give me feedback as to the calendar. It is dynamic, and we hope to make this as meaningful when we need to be in person versus when we can handle things remotely due to timing of other issues. So wanted to mention that. And also, I did provide to the committee an expanded set of goals versus what was on the goals tracker that was provided by the board office the last email from Mark and Matt. We've talked about virtually everything on that list of goals today. it is also dynamic. And so when we have other items throughout the year that come up that require attention, as we have already mentioned in this call, I think the focus being on long-range planning as much as governance, then we're certainly going to entertain adding to our list. So with that in mind, I will stop talking and ask for comments, questions, or other discussion regarding the goals and the calendar for GLRP for this year.
Yeah, Julia, this is Barb. The intent then is to have an in-person governance meeting at each board meeting, because I feel strongly that there is nothing like a face-to-face. And conference calls are great for something like this where we couldn't do it then, but I think a lot is lost through any conference call, even if we eventually Skype. So I really strongly recommend that we have governance meetings that be like finance. I think the plan is to always have one, and I think governance should be one of the meetings that meets at every board meeting face to face and fills in as needed in between.
Other thoughts from other committee members on having an in-person meeting at every meeting?
This is Matthew. I mean, this committee is really at the heart of the board. I mean, we oversee the governance of the university. And having in-person meetings is important, not merely because it gives us a chance to see each other face-to-face, but it gives us an opportunity to raise the multiple issues concerning governance that come up throughout the year. I seem to recall our last face-to-face meeting, we were constrained to the hour, and we really ran out of time to cover some important issues which later came up on the floor of the board. So if there's a way to not only facilitate meetings every time, but give us a little more flexibility so we're not constrained to the single hour, I think that would allow us to do our job much more effectively.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I also...
So this is...
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Barb, and I'll chime in next.
No, go ahead.
Well, this is Matt, everyone. I understand the points that have been raised, and I appreciate those and respect those. The conundrum that we have, of course, as a board with so many standing committees is to have every committee meet face-to-face every single cycle, sort of disallows full trustee participation, which was a goal, makes us rush through an agenda, which is suboptimal, and is just sort of impractical relative to all the things we need to discuss each time we convene. So the thought was, at the discretion of the committee chairs, face-to-face as needed and applicable, and using great technology in the interim, just like we do in our day-to-day lives in business or in personal, which can be effective and sometimes be just as good as face-to-face with some of the technology that exists in the world today. I would contend that a conference call is the least optimal of the virtual gatherings. With the technology that exists today, with telepresence and voice over IP technologies, we could be looking at each other right now. There are ways to do that. Our laptops all have little cameras at the top of them. And so I just think we ought to challenge our thinking a little bit. I hear you on the face-to-face. I could argue that, yes, it's more effective to be face-to-face, but I could also argue with passion that it's not necessary to be effective. We're running billion-dollar institutions in our world without meeting face-to-face. They're global. There's no practical way to meet face-to-face, and yet we're making, billion, trillion-dollar decisions in some instances in virtual connectivity. So I just think we got to sort of challenge our paradigm with respect to this, and that was our goal, and leaving it to the committee chairs was where we sort of ended the discussion and see how it goes.
Yeah, and Matt, I appreciate that point of view, but you're also talking about full-time employees who supplement with conference calls, and we are there anyway and giving up an entire day of work, when we could have an entire morning. And the committee, all the committees in the past, got in there in the work they needed to get done, and we could all sit in. And this, for instance, is taking up, my entire morning when I need to be at work, and I will do it. But, if there's a choice, I'm already losing a whole day on Thursday. And I think that's true for most of us. So that also is a consideration in the efficient use of volunteer time. So, and again, I just think there's no arguing face-to-face in any regard, and we're there anyway. But anyway, this is something for us to continue to monitor.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think a survey of the entire board, how it's working, will be quite useful.
Yeah, I think all that's accurate, Barb, and look, there's a counterpoint to not everybody can get there on all day Thursday because they're coming in from far away. Some people now coming in from the West Coast, Midwest, overseas. There's just trade-offs that we have to be mindful of. And every committee could contend the same thing that we're talking about on this call, that their committee is very strategic and important. Face-to-face is better than virtual. That's what we ran into, that we were sort of back-to-back from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. and still not having enough time for the committees to meet face-to-face.
Well, I look forward to continued dialogue on this.
This is Matthew. I really appreciate this discussion, and this would, if we had met last time the board met, this could have been a wonderful discussion for an hour or more, because not only can we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the new system, but I think that there are a variety of ways in which we could manage the calendar so that we could fit every committee in a single day. So I just think that this is a great line of discussion, talking about alternative ways of doing business. And if you even had an hour in the last meeting, I think we could have covered a lot of ground. So if there's a way to meet every time, that would be terrific, because this sort of thing is at the core of what we do.
Matthew just responded to an email to you yesterday about this topic, and my feeling is giving this time to gel and see. Matt and Mark have been very open to feedback from everyone on the board about how this is going to be working, and so I think, to Matt's point of not being afraid to try new things, let's give it a little time, and we will continue to have this conversation, I'm sure, at every committee, not just governance, but allowing us to see how it might be useful and then weigh and balance the pros and cons.
That's terrific. This is Matthew again. As to the email, my actual email was more about the question of jurisdiction, whether the committee had jurisdiction, whether that's something we should clarify in the standing rules. I wasn't trying to get into the substance of that, but again, I'm happy to deal with both of those issues, both the substance as well as the jurisdictional questions at a meeting.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, this is David Hunt. Sorry, go ahead.
This is Brandon here. I just want to say I agree with Barb's point, sort of in theory, that any meeting will be more productive if you have a meeting in person. But I do understand Matt Schuyler's position that we should sort of be open and try to give this new format a chance. Given that I'm flying in from out of the country, so I have a very unique situation. But that open session, sort of on Thursday morning, to have generative discussion, to meet with student organizations and to sort of really sort of build initiatives within the board. That time I found that very valuable. So I get the point that we want to have meetings in-person meetings for every board, every committee. It's more ideal, but I do understand the logic behind the change in format, and I found it helpful.
Thank you. Okay. I welcome emails and follow-up on any other topics that folks would like to have conversation about in the future, future meetings, in person or telephonic. But that is going to conclude our business items today, unless there is a committee member who has other business to bring before the committee.
Not just now.
Okay. All righty. Any other closing comments from committee members or any member of the board?
Nope. Good meeting. Good discussion.
For including us.
And I am not aware that we have any need for an executive session. All right. With that, I would declare us adjourned and thank everyone on the committee and every trustee who participated for their time this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Great show.